Welcome, kind listener. My name is Gentle Fox. You may not know me now, but by the end of this masterpiece, you will, and I trust you'll think of me as an old friend. What you'll be hearing tonight is an excerpt from our Twitch stream. I hope you'll enjoy that extra ambiance and my soft-spoken voice as we explore Leo Tolstoy's classic, Anna Karenina. Chapter 5. Stepan Arkadyevich had had an easy time at school, thanks to his natural abilities, but he was lazy and mischievous, and therefore came out among the last. Yet despite his dissipated life, none too high rank and none too ripe age, he occupied a distinguished and well-paid post as head of one of the Moscow offices. This post he had obtained through Alexei Alexandrovich Karenin, his sister Anna's husband, who occupied one of the most important positions in the ministry to which the office belonged. But if Karenin had not appointed his brother-in-law to it, then Steve Oblonsky would have obtained the post through 100 other persons, brothers, sisters, relations, cousins, uncles, aunts, or another like it, with a salary of some 6,000, which he needed because the affairs, despite his wife's ample fortune, were in disarray. Half Moscow and Petersburg were relatives or friends of Stepan Arkadyevich. He had been born into the milieu of those who were or had become the mighty of this world. 1/3 of the state dignitaries, the elders, were his father's friends and had known him in petticoats. Another third were on familiar terms with him, and the final third were good acquaintances, consequently, the distributors of earthly blessings in the form of positions, leases, concessions, and the like, were all friends of his, and could not pass over one of their own, and Oblonsky did not have to try especially hard to obtain a profitable post. All he had to do was not refuse, not envy, not quarrel, not get offended, which, owing to his natural kindness, he never did anyway. It would have seemed laughable to him if he had been told that he would not get a post with the salary he needed, the more so as he did not demand anything excessive. He only wanted what his peers were getting, and he could fill that sort of position no worse than anyone else. Stepan Arkadyevich was not only liked by all who knew him for his kind, cheerful temper and unquestionable honesty, but there was in him, in his handsome, bright appearance, shining eyes, and black brows and hair, the whiteness and ruddiness of his face, something that physically made an amiable and cheerful impression on the people he met. Aha, Steva, Oblonsky, here he is, they would almost always say with a joyful smile on meeting him, and if it sometimes happened that talking with him produced no especially joyful effect, a day or two later they would all rejoice again in the same way when they met him. Serving for the 3rd year as head of one of the Moscow offices, Stepan Arkadyevich had acquired the respect as well as the affection of his colleagues, subordinates, superiors, and all who had dealings with him. The main qualities that had earned him this universal respect in the service were, first, an extreme indulgence towards people, based on the awareness of his own shortcomings. Second, a perfect liberalism Not the sort to be read about in papers, but the sort he had in his blood, which made him treat all people, whatever their rank or status, in a perfectly equal and identical way. And third, most important, a perfect indifference to the business he was occupied with, owing to which he never got carried away and never made mistakes. Arriving at his place of work, Stepan Arkadyevich, accompanied by the respectful doorman, went with a portfolio into his small private offices, put on his uniform, and entered the main office. The scriveners and clerks all rose, bowing cheerfully and respectfully. Stepan Arkadyevich, hastily as always, went to his place, exchanged handshakes with the members, and sat down. He joked and talked exactly as much as was proper, and then got down to work. No one knew more surely than Stepan Arkadyevich how to find the limits of freedom, simplicity, and officialness necessary for getting work done in a pleasant way. The secretary, cheerful and respectful as was everyone in Stepan Arkadyevich's presence, approached him with papers and said in that familiarly liberal tone which had been introduced by Stepan Arkadyevich, "We did, after all, obtain information for the Penza provincial office. Here, if you please." "So you finally got it," said Stepan Arkadyevich, marking the page with his finger. "Well, gentlemen." And the work began. If they only knew, he thought, inclining his head gravely as he listened to the report, what a guilty boy their chairman was half an hour ago. And his eyes were laughing as the report was read. The work had to go on without interruption till 2 o'clock, and then there would be a break for lunch. It was not yet 2 when the big glass door of the office suddenly opened, and someone came in. All the members, from under the imperial portrait and behind the Zetzlo, turned toward the door, glad of the diversion, but the porter at once banished the intruder and closed the glass door behind him. When the case had been read, Stepan Arkadyevich stood up, stretched, and, giving the liberalism of the saint of the time its due, took out a cigarette while still in the room, then went into his private office. His 2 comrades, the veteran Nikitin and the Kammerjunker Grimovich, followed him out. "We'll have time to finish after lunch," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "That we will," said Nikitin. "And he must be a regular crook, this foeman," Grinovich said of one of the people involved in the case they were considering. Stepan Arkadyevich winced at Grinovich's words, thereby letting it be felt that it was inappropriate to form a premature judgment, and did not reply to him. "Who was it that came in?" he asked the porter. "Some man, Your Excellency, slipped in the moment I turned my back. He asked for you. I said when the members leave, then, where is he? Went out to the front door hall, most likely, and therefore that he kept pacing around here." "That's the one," the porter said, pointing to a strongly built, broad-shouldered man with a curly beard who, without taking off his lambskin hat, was quickly and lightly running up the worn steps of the stone stair. One skinny clerk going down with the portfolio paused, looked disapprovingly at the running man's feet, and then glanced questioningly at Oblonsky. Stepan Arkadyevich stood at the top of the stairs, his face beaming good-naturedly from behind the embroidered uniform collar, beaming still more when he recognized the man who was running up. "So it's he, Levin, at last," he said with a friendly, mocking smile, looking Levin over as he approached. How is it that you don't scorn to come looking for me in this dent? Said Stepan Arkadyych, not satisfied with a handshake, but kissing his friend. Been here long? I just arrived, and wanted very much to see you, Levine replied, looking around bashfully and at the same time crossly and uneasily. Well, let's go to my office, said Stepan Arkadyych, knowing his friend's proud and irascible shyness, and taking him by the arm, he drew him along as if guiding him through dangers. Stepan Arkadyych was on familiar terms with almost all his acquaintances, with old men of 60 and with boys of 20, with actors, ministers, merchants, and imperial adjutants, so that a great many of those who were his intimates occupied opposite ends of the social ladder, and would have been very surprised to learn that they had something in common through Oblonsky. He was on familiar terms with everyone with whom he drank champagne, and he drank champagne with everyone. Therefore, when in the presence of his subordinates, he met his disreputable familiars, as he jokingly called me of his friends, he was able, with his peculiar tact, to lessen the unpleasantness of the impression for his subordinates. Levine was not a disreputable familiar, but Oblonsky sensed that Levine was thinking he might not want to show his closeness to him in front of his staff, and therefore hastened to take him to his office. Levine was almost the same age as Oblonsky, and was his familiar not only in the champagne line. Levine had been the comrade and friend of his early youth. They loved each other, in spite of the difference in their character and taste, as friends love each other who become close in early youth. But in spite of that, as often happens between people who have chosen different ways, each of them, while rationally justifying the other's activity, despised it in his heart. To each of them it seemed that the life he led was the only real life, and the one his friend led was a mere illusion. Oblonsky could not repress a slightly mocking smile at the sight of Levine. So many times he had seen him come to Moscow from the country, where he did something or other, though Stepan Arkadyych could never understand precisely what, nor did it interest him. Levine always came to Moscow agitated, hurried, a little uneasy, and annoyed at this uneasiness, and most often with a completely new, unexpected view of things. Stepan Arkadyych laughed at this, and loved it. In just the same way, at heart Levine despised both his friend's city style of life and his job, which he regarded as trifling, and he laughed at it all. But the difference was that Oblonsky, while doing as everyone else did, laughed confidently and good-naturedly, whereas Levine laughed unconfidently and sometimes crossly. "We've long been expecting you," said Stepan Arkadyych, going into his office and releasing Levine's arm, as if to show that the dangers were past. "I'm very, very glad to see you," he went on. "Well, how are you doing? When did you arrive?" Levine was silent, glancing at the unfamiliar faces of Oblonsky's two colleagues, and especially at the elegant Grinovich's hands, with such long white fingers, such long yellow nails curving at the tips, and such huge glittering cufflinks on his sleeves, that these hands clearly absorbed all his attention, and did not allow him any freedom of thought. Oblonsky noticed it at once, and smiled. "Ah, yes, let me introduce you," he said. "My colleagues, Philip Ivanitch Nikitin, Mikhail Stanislavich Grinovich." And turning to Levine, "A zemstvo activist." A new Zemstvo a gymnast, life's 150 pounds with one hand, a cattle breeder and a hunter, and my friend, Konstantin Dmitritch Levin, the brother of Sergei Ivanitch Koznishev. Very pleased, said the little old man. I have the honor of knowing your brother, Sergei Ivanitch, said Grinovitch, proffering his slender hand with its long nails. Levin frowned, shook the hand coldly, and turned at once to Oblonsky. Though he had great respect for his maternal half-brother, a writer known to all Russia, nevertheless he could not stand being addressed as the brother of the famous Koznishev, rather than as Konstantin Levin. No, I'm no longer a Zemstvo activist. I've quarreled with them all and no longer go to the meetings, he said, addressing Oblonsky. That was quick, Oblonsky said with a smile. But how? Why? A long story. I'll tell you some day, said Levin. But he began telling it at once. Well, to make it short, I became convinced that there is not and cannot be any Zemstvo activity. He spoke as if something had just offended him. On the one hand, it's just a plaything. They play at Parliament, and I'm neither young enough nor old enough to amuse myself with playthings. And on the other, he faltered, hand. It's a way for the district coterie to make a little money. Before there were custodies, courts, but now it's the Zemstvo, not in the form of bribes, but in the form of unearned salaries. He spoke as hotly as if someone there had argued against his opinion. Oh, no, I see you're in a new phase again, a conservative one, said Stepan Arkadyevitch. However, of that later. Yes, later, but I had to see you, Levin said, looking with hatred at Grinovitch's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled almost imperceptibly. Didn't you say you'd never put on European clothes again? He said, looking over his new clothes, obviously from a French tailor. So I see. A new phase. Levin suddenly blushed, but not as grown-up people blush, slightly, unaware of it themselves, but as boys do, feeling that their bashfulness makes them ridiculous, becoming ashamed as a result, and blushing even more, almost to the point of tears. And it was so strange to see that intelligent, manly face in such a childish state that Oblonsky stopped looking at him. So where shall we see each other? I need very, very much to have a talk with you, said Levin. Oblonsky appeared to reflect. I'll tell you what. Let's go to Gurin's for lunch and talk it over there. I'm free until 3. No, Levin replied after a moment's thought. I still have to go somewhere. Well, all right. Then let's dine together. Dine? But I have nothing special to say or ask. Just a couple of words, and we can have a chat later. Then tell me the couple of words now, and we can discuss things over dinner. A couple of words are these, said Levin. Anyway, it's nothing special. His face suddenly acquired an angry expression, which came from the effort to overcome his bashfulness. What are the Shtcherbatskys doing? The same as ever, he said. Stepan Arkadyevitch, who had known for a long time that Levin was in love with his sister-in-law Kitty, smiled almost imperceptibly, and his eyes shone merrily. A couple of words, you said, but I can't answer in a couple of words because... Excuse me a moment. The secretary came in with familiar deference and a certain modest awareness, common to all secretaries, of his superiority to his chief in the knowledge of business, approached Oblonsky with some papers, and, in the guise of a question, began explaining some difficulty. Stepan Arkadyevich, without listening to the end, placed his hand benignly on the secretary's sleeve. "No, just do as I told you," he said, softening the remark with a smile. And after briefly explaining the matter as he understood it, he pushed the papers aside, saying, "Do it that way, please, Zakhar Nikitch." The abashed secretary withdrew. Levin, who during this conference with the secretary had recovered completely from his embarrassment, stood with both elbows resting on the chair back, a look of mocking attention on his face. "I don't understand, he said. "What don't you understand?" said Oblonsky, with the same cheerful smile, taking out a cigarette. He expected some strange escapade from Levin. "I don't understand what you do," Levin said with a shrug. "How can you do it seriously?" "Why not?" "Why, because there's nothing to do." "That's what you think, but we're buried in work." "Paperwork." Well, you do have a gift for that," Levin added. "That is, you think I'm lacking in something?" "Maybe so," said Levin. "But all the same I admire your grandeur, and am proud that my friend is in such a great man. However, you didn't answer my question," he added with a desperate effort to look straight into Oblonsky's eyes. "Well, all right. Wait a while and you'll come round to the same thing. It's all right so long as you've got 8,000 acres and the Karazin district and those muscles and the freshness of a 12-year-old girl. But you'll join us some day. Yes, as for what you asked about, nothing's changed. But it's not too bad you haven't been here for so long." "Why?" "No, nothing," Oblonsky replied. "We'll talk, but why in fact did you come?" "We'll talk about that later as well," Levin said, again blushing to the stars. "Well, all right, understood," said Stepan Arkadyevich. "You see, I'd invite you to our place, but my wife is not quite well. You know what? If you want to see them, they'll certainly be in the zoological gardens today, from 4 to 5. Kitty goes skating there. Go there yourself, and I'll join you, and we'll dine together somewhere." "Excellent. See you later, then." "Watch out, I know you. Don't forget or suddenly leave for the country," Stepan Arkadyevich called out with a laugh. "Certainly not." And remembering only at the door that he had forgotten to take leave of Oblonsky's colleagues, Levin walked out of the office. "Must be a very energetic gentleman," said Grinovitch after Levin left. "Yes, old man," Stepan Arkadyevich said, nodding. "There's a lucky one. 8,000 acres in the Karzin district, everything to look forward to, and so much freshness. Not like our sort. What do you have to complain about, Stepan Arkadyevich?" "Oh, it's bad. Awful," Stepan Arkadyevich said with a heavy sigh. End of chapter 5.